Sorry about that. Yeah, yeah. That's fine, boys. You can sit here. You can sit here. That's fine. All right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I start it again. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah. Assalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa mawalah. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la syarikalah wa asyhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh la nabiyya ba'da. Amma ba'd. Okay, brothers, sisters, and ladies and gentlemen, inshallah, tonight we are here gathered in this humble place, in this blessed place. Allah Ta'ala has allowed us to meet in this place, and nothing but our iman have allowed us to meet in this gathering, inshallah. Tonight is very special because we have a special guest as well. Our brother here, brother Guy's Crime. He is the former president of Islamic Council of Victoria, but I have known him for quite a while. He was also a practicing lawyer, and at the moment he is also he is in charge of the Light Foundation. If you heard about that, this is the foundation that work in giving our kids and also adults the Islamic education, especially in dealing with our problem today in the living in this Western and liberal society. Brother Reis is going to give a series of lecture and talk about in our Indonesian community. This is our first out of the 3 talks that we're going to be held within the Indonesian Muslim community. He's going to talk about the expansion horizons, about being a Muslim, Islam in a Western liberalized society. In particular, I'm going to talk about this issue about what is things that become a challenge for us in being in a liberalized society. The true and false, the right and wrong is not defined by the book anymore, but not by defined by the words of Allah anymore, but it's defined by who says and agrees with that more, and that is what is right and wrong now, which is against our teaching of Islam. This is one of the things. And one of the issues that very relevant with us today is about the issue of lesbian, gay, transsexual, and transgender. This is things that are relevant to us because if you heard the news, like only last week, they have this big celebration in Sydney, the Mardi Gras parade. And also, if you follow the news as well, the Australian government is actually made a new initiative to introduce what they call a safe school. And I'm a school teacher myself, and I'm one of those actually under pressure to accept this. But this is actually one of the things that, the Christian lobbies, the Christian lobbies group is trying to fight against. What about our attitudes? What are we going to do about this? Because some of the things that they want our kids to be introduced with are not appropriate. Even in terms of the age, and also in terms of our Islamic teaching. So this is how the issue there. Before I pass it to Brother Gais, the Muslim women wings of Indonesian community have done a survey among our community, and it's a very interesting finding. Brother, are you gonna share this with us, or you want me to? A very interesting findings about this survey was that, for example, and unfortunately I have to mention this, we are a bit disappointed that only 46 so far that responding to this survey, despite our effort, to get as much as response. But please, if you have time, not only for the mothers, because at the moment only the mothers who responded to this, and it looks like the fathers are, you know, you need to come on, guys. You need to to do more and respond. This is not only the problem of the mothers. This is our problems as well. So if you can respond to this, and so far with this response, that is amazing. That Alhamdulillah, despite of this, that our understanding about the issue of the, you know, lesbian, gay, trans, bisexual, and gender, we have a correct understanding about this issue. And most of the people think that this is an issue that we need to deal with. This is you know, related and connected to us, and we need to deal with this. And even like, you know, only minority of people think that this is something that, you know, a life choice, a life option, a lifestyle that people can choose. But majority of people think this is something that is against our teaching and that can be cured as well. And then in terms of attitudes about hearing and reading about the issues, mostly positive response that we're expecting Muslims. Only minority of a Muslim that the respondent said that this is not issue that we need to worry about. Majority is very positive. And also in terms of, you know, how parents communicate this issue with the children, many parents actually take the matters in their own hand and explain this to the children. Only few that essentially don't do as much. So in general, just to cut it short, that Alhamdulillah, we got a very good response, you know, how we deal with this issue. But despite this is not something that we can just put aside. This is an issue that is in front of our eyes all the time, and we will deal. It's gonna get bigger and bigger and getting worse and worse. I'm just gonna make you one point that I've just probably make a point, if you let me, brother. Like being, you know, some of the issue that I have dealt with communities the moment is that one of the youth actually come and approach me, and then he told me, brother, that he has no interest with you know, like in women, and this is very sad. And this is something that we are dealing at the moment. And so it's not something that beyond our community. This is real issue that we have to deal with. And inshallah, with a good approach from our community, and we all can, you know, hand in hand together in this issue, we can deal with that and help our community and protect our community. So inshallah, without further ado, I'll pass this to Brother Qais. Inshallah, we're gonna give Brother Qais going to give a talk, and then after that, we're going to have some Q&A. Inshallah, all this.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين السلام والصلاة على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Just having some technical issues. Can we use this? Let me use this. I'll use this. Is that better? Yeah, that's better. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين السلام والصلاة على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد. Thank you, Juan, for, I guess, inviting me to share with you some thoughts tonight on this issue of homosexuality, transgender, bi, and think of all the other acronyms you can add on there. Just some disclaimers first. What I'm going to share with you tonight is my personal opinion. It's not that of the Islamic Council of Victoria, and it's not officially that of the Light Foundation either. It's my personal opinion. So, you know, I'm accountable for everything that I say. Nobody else is accountable for that, inshallah. It's a really, on one hand, it's an important issue, but on the other hand, it's also an issue that we're at risk of allowing it to become too important for us. And inshallah, as I share my thoughts, I'll explain why that is. It's important because, as the brother was saying, the government is going to continue to push this issue of normalization of homosexuality, of sexual fluidity and things of that nature. You know, we're going to have the issue of the legalization of same-sex marriage. We've got We had the Mardi Gras up in Sydney last week. We've got programs being run into schools around making this issue of sexual fluidity more and more acceptable amongst our young people. I'm going to talk specifically about homosexuality, but the principles apply across the board. There are slight variances, theologically between all of them, but we just don't have enough time tonight to do a separate one on each, but the principles are exactly the same. I'm going to cover sort of three areas. I'm going to talk a little bit about, from a perspective of the deen. I think it's important for us to actually understand what the religion itself says on this issue of same-sex relationships and what have you. I'll then just cover a couple of the main arguments that people who drive this agenda put forward around why society should accept this sort of a lifestyle, and just my views around how we respond to those things. Having said that, let's be really clear that when we come from a perspective of faith, other people don't. And ultimately, this is going to come down to iman, down to belief, right? But at least we can put forward our perspective in a way where we perhaps, get the religion not to be seen quite so bigoted in the mainstream community as it otherwise would be. And on this regard, we're no different to our Christian and our Jewish cousins, right? It's an issue across all faith communities, not just ours. And then finally, I'll talk about, and I'll share my views around how we deal with people who have these inclinations, because they are, both within our community and outside our community. So how do we respond, how do we engage with those people? Because I think it's really important for us to understand, how to do that. So they're sort of the three things that I'll cover off, inshallah. Normally, I don't mind questions as we have a discussion, but I think tonight I prefer you to leave the questions to the end, only because I'm sort of going to layer this discussion a little bit so that the themes will build on each other, and I might actually answer some of your questions as the talk progresses. So we'll leave some Q&A for the end, inshallah. All right. So what does the deen say about this issue of same sex? First of all, we need to consider our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Our starting point is our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? What's the basis of our relationship with our Creator? To do that, I want to just highlight a few of the things our Aqidah says we believe in. Right? So what is it that we as Muslims believe in with respect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His attributes and our relationships with Him as our Creator? First of all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala owes us nothing whatsoever. Our starting position is that Allah owes us nothing. If He was suddenly to take everything away, if we were all to cease to exist right this moment, we would have no recourse whatsoever against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? If we stopped worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it would not detract from Him in one iota. Right? Nothing we do takes anything away from Allah or adds anything to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? He owes us nothing. Right? It's a really important point as we build up, I guess, our understanding in this issue. The next point is that we exist through His mercy and generosity alone. If it wasn't for the infinite mercy and generosity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we wouldn't be here. So just think about all the things that we actually need to survive. Air, water, food, the sun, all of those things come from Allah's mercy and generosity and nothing else. Right? So our entire existence, everything, every breath we take is a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything in creation is a manifestation of His divine will and His attribute as the Creator. Really important, because we also believe that every single act of creation is infallible, right? Every single act of creation is exactly the way in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed it to be. So this notion that somebody is born in a particular way and that particular way is wrong, from an Islamic perspective, is wrong. Right? There's no such thing in Islam as somebody being born in the wrong body. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not make those mistakes. While the form that we come into this world may not be perfect as we understand it, somebody's short, somebody's tall, somebody's a bit heavier like me, not perfect, but I am exactly the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed that I was going to be. And in that sense, it's infallible. Every single act of creation is infallible, right? It's a really important point to keep in mind when you're talking about things like, sexual identity and those sorts of things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all-knowing. Right? By this, what we mean is that everything in creation was always known, is always known in every moment, and will always be known before it was willed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge was complete before he created anything and will remain complete until we are no longer around. Right? Every grain of sand that it moves, every leaf that is blown by every gust of wind is known by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before he wills it to occur. But knowledge of something doesn't take away our agency as people. Right? Often people make a mistake to think if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills everything, then that means we aren't in control. No. Our Aqidah says that's not true. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a will and an aql, a mind. It's what distinguishes us from the animals and what distinguishes us from the angels. The angels have no free will. They can only do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees that they do. We can. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us a will and gave us free choice. So while he knows everything and while nothing happens without his will, he has told us that you are free to choose and we are accountable for our choices. Yeah? So all of those factors come into play in understanding what our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And ultimately what that comes down to is that of a slave and master. Right? We are the slaves, the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said the most beloved names to Allah, the exalted, are Abdullah, the servant of Allah, or the slave of Allah, and Abdul Rahman, the servant of the merciful. So the most pleasing names to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are those which identify us as his servants or his slaves. Right? So you think about it, we're also taught when we're close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is when we're at our lowest, when our foreheads are on the ground in salah. So the lower we physically are, the closer we are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As a slave, we owe everything to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We owe everything to him, and we have no right to question what he has decreed for us. Ultimately, this is why Islam is referred to as the religion of submission. We submit entirely to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without reservation. Part of that means that we sometimes do say and believe things that we may not completely understand the reasons why we do them. And it's why I always say when we're in discussions with non-Muslims about issues, rarely do I encourage we go down the road of science, for example. Science is not infallible. Science is very fallible. Every year you'll hear things that we believed scientifically last year have now changed. Right? As mankind's understanding increases, not sure what happened there. What we believe changes. Yeah. So in this particular issue that we're talking about, 30 years ago they considered a mental health issue. Now they're trying to claim that it's a biological issue. Right? So science changes. Don't get into the trap of trying to argue from a perspective of science. It's good for us to try and understand why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires some things of us, but ultimately we have to accept, and we do accept, that our ability to rationalize things is limited. Right? Our knowledge is not even an atom's weight compared to that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So our ability to rationalize things is limited. Only revelation is infallible and complete. Right? So if there are things in the Quran that we don't quite understand, we still accept them until we do understand what they are. I'll try and hold this closer. Okay. On this point of what we accept in the Quran itself, and I guess this is the last point I want to make on this issue of what we believe. We believe that the Quran itself is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's fundamentally different to what our Christian and Jewish cousins believe. We believe that the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the Quran itself, Allah says to us, and if any one of the polytheists seeks your protection, then grant him protection so that he may hear the words of Allah. That's in Surah At-Tawbah. In Surah Al-Fatih, he says, those who remain behind will say when you set out toward the war bounty to take it, they will say, let us follow you. They wish to change the words of Allah. there's a hadith of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam where during the Hajj season, he would try to invite people to Islam, and he would say, who are willing to give me asylum so that I can convey the speech of my Lord? For the Quraysh have prevented me from conveying the speech of my Lord. In all of these references, the ayat and hadith, speech of my Lord, the word of Allah, the speech of Allah is all referring to the Quran. Right? So the Quran, fundamentally part of our Aqidah, is that it is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are some things in the Quran which lend themselves to metaphorical understanding, to analogical reasoning. You know, they can be interpreted in some different ways. But there are other parts of the Quran which are very clear and unambiguous. Yeah? Establish salah, establish your prayer and your charity, very clear. We have to pray, we have to give charity, no issues about it. The Quran doesn't tell us how we pray, how we give charity. We refer to the Sunnah for that. In this issue of sexuality, and obviously the topic we're talking about tonight is one of those topics where there's no modesty in the religion when we're talking about these issues. So, you know, we're also going to be talking about issues which are quite sensitive, but, you know, that's what we will do, inshallah. But on this issue, what does the Quran say specifically about this issue? It's obviously comes out of the story of the people of Nabi Lut. And what the Quran says in Surah Al-A'raf, and Lut, remember, when he said unto his folk, will ye commit the worst sin, such as no creature ever did before you? Lo, ye come with lust unto men instead of women. Nay, but ye are a people who exceed all bounds. There's no grey area in that area. It is very clear, right? Over 1,400 years of scholarship, all the ulama, consistently across all the madhab, agree unanimously. This is one of those areas where there is not a single scholar, recognized scholar, that disagrees on this issue. Homosexuality, the physical act of homosexuality, and put aside whether it's male, male, female, female, just generally, is haram. It is forbidden in Islam. The act of homosexuality is forbidden in Islam. Anybody who tries to tell you otherwise, you walk away from. Don't listen to them. And unfortunately, there are people today, so-called progressive Muslims, who are trying to convince the rest of the world that Islam in some way permits these acts, right? It doesn't. It would be like me getting up and saying it's not illegal to murder somebody in Australia, even though the law says it is, even though thousands of court cases says it is. It would be exactly the same. Somebody who tries to tell you that homosexuality is permitted in the deen is ignoring the Quran itself, is ignoring 1,400 years of scholarship, and is ignoring the Sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, right? We don't accept it, right? There are things that we just have to stay firm on, and this is one of those things, right? So our starting position is, it is haram, right? There's no two ways about it. It is haram. I'm just trying to shorten a little bit, just in the interest of time. So the act itself is haram. The really important distinction, though, from the perspective of the deen is this. Islam doesn't judge people on what they think or what they feel. Islam judges people on what they do. So the act is haram. But somebody who has those inclinations, who has those feelings, but stays firm on their deen and doesn't act on those things is not a sinner, is not outside of Islam. This is where I was saying, sometimes we overreact on some things, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about how we deal with people like that. But somebody who holds firm to their deen, doesn't deny that this act is haram, right? Is actually somebody who we should put all of our support behind, because that's the real jihad. Somebody who is fighting their nafs, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Just on this issue of acting on our desires, because people often say, well, why shouldn't people, be allowed to act on these things, on their desires? In the Quran itself, right? In the Quran, I'll try and get the ayah for you. I'll come back to it. I'll come back to the ayah, but to the reference, sorry. But the ayah says, "Have you, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam?" So this is directed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Have you seen him who has taken his illah, his God, his own vain desire? Says, have you seen somebody who has been ruled by his desire? Would you then be a wakil? So would you then be a protector over somebody like that? Says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, talking and directing this to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So have you seen somebody who has taken their desire as their ruler? Would you protect or would you look after somebody like that? And then also it says, or do you think that most of them hear or understand? He's asking a question. They are only like cattle. Nay, they are even further astray from the path. So these are the people who succumb to their desires. You know, Oswald is telling us here, it's not out of the norm for people to have desires that they shouldn't act upon. Right? Human nature. That's what human nature is. You know, we have desires, but Oswald is telling us you can't allow those desires to rule you or for you to be ruled by them. So you've got to, you know, really work hard to dampen down those desires. That's really what this is saying. So in a very quick sense, we've just clarified what the position is, right? The physical act is haram, but having the feelings of themselves, if you don't act upon them, isn't a sin in itself. So let's just quickly cover off a couple of the arguments that you will hear most often put forward around in a secular society like Australia around why same-sex relationships should be allowed. You know, and one of the first ones that often people say is, well, what people do in their private lives doesn't hurt anybody else. You know, what happens in behind closed doors is nobody's business but their own. So that's what you'll hear. But what's the reality? Is that in fact true? So put aside what the Dean says. Let's look at the society that we actually live in, Australian society and Western society generally. Is it true, in fact, that things that happen behind closed doors, privately, you know, aren't regulated? They're nobody's concern. Well, actually, it's not true. It's not true at all, right? There are many things, you know, which still in these sort of societies, in Western liberal societies, are considered taboo and are regulated and there are laws about them. So it's not a question of society making laws and regulations about personal issues. It's a question about which personal issues these societies want to make laws about and which they don't want to make laws about. Right? There's no such freedom in a Western society. There's no such thing as total personal freedom. Right? Let's make that really clear. There's no such thing as total personal freedom. Right? In all Western countries, Australia included, there are many things that limit our personal freedoms. And obviously, it's a very fundamental Islamic perspective as well. You know, Islamically, we limit individual freedoms. You know, when it comes to our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our worship, our ibadah, it's a very personal, one-on-one relationship. You know, there are no interveners between us and our Creator like there is in some of the other religions. We don't have a church, we don't have a priesthood. You know, when I need to talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then I just get down and I pray and I make dua. I don't need anybody else. But when it comes to our mu'amalat, our dealings with each other, no, the Din says the ummah, the group, the benefit of the group, the health of the group takes precedence over the individual. And there are many things from an Islamic perspective which are prohibited because of that principle, you know, and some of those things, you know, you'll hear often about, you know, in Western society as well. So if you take alcohol, for example, right, a lot of people can drink alcohol and not suffer any harm from it. And scientifically, in inverted commas, right, there are studies that show having 1 or 2 drinks is actually good for your health. That's at an individual level, though. But at a societal level, the harms are so extreme when things go wrong that Islam says everybody's forbidden from drinking. Right? The hikam, the wisdom behind that is, while individuals may be able to handle themselves, the ummah as a whole will suffer greatly if alcohol becomes a common thing across the community. And we see it. We see it all around us, the ill effects of alcohol and gambling. Right? So this is where Islam says the individual gives up certain things for the whole group. Western society drives this agenda around individual freedoms. They try to convince you that the individual has complete freedom to do what they want and should have the complete freedom to do what they want. That's what they try and convince you, but it's not actually the reality. Let's look at some things in this particular area around sexuality and what have you, right? So they say, for example, that same-sex relationships should be okay. But at the same time, they will say having more than one marriage partner, polygamy, is wrong. And we're going to criminalise that, but we're going to make this legal. Let's think about that rationally. So they drive this whole idea of rational thinking, right? Put aside what the Islamic perspective says. Logically, how does that make sense? How does it make sense that same-sex relationships are okay, but relationship between a male and a female, because there's more than one partner involved in that marriage, and they're still consenting adults, is not okay. Where is the logic in that? Right? Because it's a moral decision. So the West still makes moral judgments. So they've made a moral judgment that polygamy is wrong, and so they're going to criminalise that. And now they make a moral judgment that same-sex relationships are okay, so they're going to decriminalise that. Right? What about teenage sex? Right? It is illegal for anybody under the age of 18 years to get married. But it's not illegal for somebody under the age of 18 to have sexual relations with someone. So in their logic, it is okay for somebody to be sexually active at, say, the age of 16, for a girl to get pregnant and have a child at the age of 16, but it's criminal for her to get married at the age of 16. I don't understand it. I don't understand it. How can you say that it's okay to have a child out of wedlock, but then it's wrong for you to get married and raise that child in a loving home? There's no logic to it. The problem is when you look at the basis on which people make moral decisions, right? Our moral compass is, we would say, stronger than theirs. Right? We have the Quran and the Sunnah that we can point to, something which is immutable, hasn't changed, something which is always there and always clear. When you rely on moral decisions to be made by the common denominator amongst humans, then it's always going to go down to the lowest point, right? So it's not that Western societies don't make moral judgments, it's that they pick and choose the ones that they make. And at the moment, they're picking and choosing those moral judgments which are adverse to people of faith, not just Muslims, but people of faith, Muslims, Christians, Jews, as opposed to secular people, right? The real issue here isn't between Muslim and non-Muslim. The real issue here is between secular people, atheists, and people of faith, right? We're the target at the moment, but we're not the end game. The end game here is to remove religiosity from society, from the public sphere. You're free to practice your religion within the four walls of your home. The moment you step out the door, you've got to put it away. That is the end game. Whether you're a Jew, a Muslim, or Christian, doesn't matter. The moment you step out the door, sorry, you can't appear to be religious. You can't practice overtly your religion. That is where this is all going to, right? You know, there are, and I guess the moral issues just keep piling up. You know, I guess the last couple of examples, when you rely on mankind to make these sort of moral judgments. If 10 years ago, if you'd asked anybody, would incest ever be permissible in society, we would all go, you've got to be kidding, you're joking. It's obviously completely hard on from our perspective. But even in general Western society, it was taboo and still is mostly, right? And the reason I say mostly, right now in Germany and in Denmark, there is a debate going on about the legalization of incest, right? So I'm not making this stuff up, right? Right? It started in Germany. So the National German Ethics Council has made a recommendation to the German government to legalize incest between consenting siblings. That argument is now being picked up in Denmark. That's what happens when you don't have an objective basis on which to make moral judgments on. Right? That's what Western society is heading towards. So the question we ask is, on what basis do you make judgments such as that and say those things are okay, and yet the things that we say are morally preferable are not okay? Right? Don't fall for this trap that they try and convince you that they are this liberal, democratic society, this completely free society. They're not. They're just very selective about the things that they want to be free about. And right now, the things that they want to be free about are the things that we say, no way. We don't accept those things. All right, so that's the first point. The next point is, well, people engaging in these activities don't cause harm to anybody, right? They're not causing harm, unlike drugs and alcohol, where there's a harm there either to the person or somebody else. Even abortion, right? Abortion is a moral judgment. Some areas allow abortion, some don't. It's a moral judgment for whether you permit a fetus to be aborted or not, right? So they say, well, these people who are involved in same-sex relationships aren't causing anybody harm. But that's only if you look at things in a very narrow sense, right? Sexuality, sex is a big deal in Western societies. It's a big deal in all societies. That's why every society, regardless of faith, religion, every society has always regulated sexual conduct in that community, right? It is a big deal. That's why they had a sexual revolution, right? That's why this whole issue of same-sex has now become the central point of the whole argument around human rights in Western countries. If it wasn't that important, why are they worrying about it, right? For those psychologists out there, Freud, who's the father of Western psychology, basically said every single act a human does goes back to their sexual desires and their frustrations, right? So, the father of psychology says everything people do is related to sex, right? We see it all the time on TV, in the ads. They use sex appeal to sell things. Don't tell us sex doesn't matter. It's a huge deal, right? But what they're trying to do, of course, is make it on their terms, and they're trying to limit our ability to engage from a moral perspective. So obviously, the more those things happen, the more impact on society as a whole, and we would say more negative impact as you take a lot of those previous prohibitions away. I get the third point I want to cover on that one is that they deserve to be happy. Doesn't everybody deserve to be happy? They're not hurting themselves. Everybody should be able to be loved and love and have and live a fulfilled and happy life. Well, yes, from one perspective, and I guess this is probably one of the hardest ones really to deal with because it touches our emotions, our empathy. We're generally a very compassionate people, and so we think, well, everybody does deserve the right to be happy. But our view of happiness is a little bit different. All right. So what is it? What does happiness look like for us? I'll come back to that. So, sorry, just. I'm just looking for an area of the Quran that I was going to refer to. So what does happiness look like for us? Okay. Happiness for us as Muslims isn't connected with what we do and say and the desires that we satisfy in this world. Happiness for us is fundamentally connected with pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, pleasing our Creator. In the Quran, in Surah Al-Ma'idah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "This is the day in which the truthful will profit from the truth. There are gardens under which rivers flow. They shall abide therein forever. Allah is pleased with them and they pleased with him." That is the great success. Radiyallahu anhum wa radiyallahu an. That is the great success. The great success is what? Entering paradise. The way to enter paradise is to be pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and for us to be pleased with him. So let's just talk about that for a moment. How are we pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Really simple. Simple thing to say. We have the Quran, we have the Sunnah. That's it. Follow the Quran. Follow what Allah tells us to do. He's given us the path. Sirat al-Mustaqim. Right? He's given us the path. Follow the path and you'll be pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does it mean for us to be pleased with Allah? Do we have a right to judge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, given what we said earlier about our aqidah? No, we don't. We're not judging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what does it mean for us to be pleased with him? What it means is that we are pleased with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for us. That is what it means to be pleased with Allah. It doesn't matter what our lot in life is. Some of us are given more wealth than others. Some of us are given more beauty than others. Some of us are even more, more intellect than others. It doesn't matter what it is. The way we demonstrate us being pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that we accept. This is what sabr is. Sabr is that we accept the state that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for us, and we say alhamdulillah. Right? Alhamdulillah, we accept it. Right? So we accept what Allah has given to us and we do all the things that are pleasing to Allah. That is happiness for us. Right? That is what happiness for us is. And this thing is repeated through the Quran so many times that it's hard for us to say, not to accept that that's what it is. The next point that they often raise is, well, this is, people are made this way, so they can't control what they do, right? They're born this way, right? Whether it's they're attracted to someone of the same sex, or whether they feel they're in the wrong body, whatever the case may be. But they're born this way, so they should have a right to be able to live their life the way, that they were made. A couple of points on this one. First of all, given, again, what we've said already, we don't accept that people are born in a way which would be contradictory to pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Really important. We don't accept it, right? And a really important here, I guess a concept for us to have a quick talk about is that of fitrah. In Islam, we have something which is referred to as the fitrah, the natural state of the soul. The natural state of the soul. In the Quran, we are told that every single soul, before any single one of us was actually created, every soul that was ever going to come into this world was brought before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah said, do you accept that I am your Lord? And every single soul that was ever going to come into creation said, yes, Ya Allah, you are our Lord. Every single soul, before they came into this world. So when a soul comes into this world, it comes already knowing its creator. It comes in that pure state. That's what we refer to as the fitrah. That's why we believe that any child, doesn't matter whether they're born to a Muslim family or to a non-Muslim family, to a family of idolaters or of animists, people who believe in animal gods, it doesn't matter. Every single child is born in that state of fitrah. And if Allah subhanahu calls them back to him before they reach the age of being a mukallaf, they go straight to Jannah. Because they have that pure soul still in them. But fitrah goes a little bit beyond that. It's not just coming in as a pure soul. The soul itself comes already knowing how to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if the soul already comes knowing how to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it's not going to do things that are going to displease Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unless something has happened to it. What happens to it doesn't come with it. It comes after it arrives. It comes in a pure state. It's what then we do, the choices we make, the environment that we create, that then changes the soul. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that says, every one of you is born on the state of fitrah, then your parents will turn you into either a Christian or a Jew. So every child comes into a state of fitrah, then we will do something to that child that changes its state, to the soul, the environment, and or the choices that we then make from that point on. In the Quran, Allah says to the Prophet, he says, set your face single-mindedly towards the pure, the Hanif religion, right? The religion of monotheism, of Tawheed. And so he's connecting here the pure religion with something that's going to come after it, and adhere to the fitrah, the true nature in which Allah has created mankind. So in the Quran, Allah's telling us, you can't have one without the other, right? You can't be pure in your religion unless you're also on the fitrah. They come together, right? So what happens after we're born? Well, we do lots of things, right? We create environments that influence children. I remember growing up, when I was growing up, lots of children, it was very natural, they wanted to take their clothes off. It seems to be something that lots of little kids want to do. Whether it's hot, they like taking their clothes off. Do we just allow them to do that? Well, no, we don't. As parents, we intervene. We say, no, it's haram, it's ab, it's bad, put your clothes back on. That's how you teach children. That's how you teach children. What would happen if we said to the child, oh, mashallah, go ahead, do it. If it makes you feel good, do it. But it's what we then do, what the people around us do, that either help us dampen those desires or it inflames the desires. Right? We all have desires. It's about controlling those desires. Ultimately, the only sexual activity that is permissible from an Islamic perspective is between a man and a woman in a sanctioned marriage. That is it, right? In a sanctioned marriage. Anything outside of that is haram, is prohibited. Right? Anything outside of this is prohibited. People have desires. People have desires of all sorts of desires. Outside of same-sex desires, we've got people who have such a strong sexual drive that their partner can't satisfy them, so they go elsewhere. We have people, unfortunately, who do have desires for people who are prohibited to them, within the family. Unfortunately, those things happen. What do we say to those people? Do we say to those people, go ahead and satisfy your desires? No, we don't. We wouldn't permit that. Same-sex feelings are in the same category. It's exactly the same. Why would we say, yes, this is permissible, when we say, no, you can't just go satisfy yourself with anybody out there? You can't, if you're not married, you can't go out and satisfy those desires. Many people don't get married in the world for a whole range of reasons. They are no different to people who have feelings for someone of the same gender. Why is that okay and this isn't okay? It's not. They're all in the same category. We need to stop seeing this as something which is so significantly different that it should be treated in a different way. Islamically, it's no different. The only thing permissible is between a man and a woman in a valid marriage. Everything else is haram. Everything else is haram. That's it. And we treat them all exactly the same way. I think I'll just move on now to just some thoughts around how we deal with people in this in this sort of a category, just given that the time that's going. So what do we do? How do we respond and how do we deal with people in the context that we are, right? In the context that we are. We need to remember the context that we're in. We are a tiny minority, 2.2% of the population of Australia. Globally, we're living in a non-Muslim country, right? So that's our context, and it's really important for us to remember that. So for non-Muslims who choose to live this lifestyle, right? So non-Muslims, and I'll come back to Muslims. For non-Muslims, this is not as big an issue as I think we sometimes make it out, and we're at risk of blowing it up beyond what it is. The reason why I say that is we're all going to taste death. And when we do any of the three questions the angels ask us have to do with our sexuality? No. We're not going to, non-Muslims are not going to get asked when in the grave, what was your sexuality? They're going to get asked, who was your Lord? What did you believe in? And who was your prophet? If they can't answer those questions, they don't even get a ticket to the last day. Their disbelief is a far greater issue for us than their sexuality, right? Are we going to go out there and be proactively making da'wah on someone's sexuality when they don't believe in Islam at all? It's a waste of time. We should be more concerned with their disbelief than with whether they identify as a male or a female, or whether they have feelings for someone of the same gender. Their akhirah is going to be judged firstly by their state of belief, not their state of sexual attraction, right? So don't make it an issue when the more important issue is what we really need to be focusing on. So in your dealings with them, when we're dealing with non-Muslims, it's not the primary issue for us, right? Our primary issue is, what is our role when we're dealing with non-Muslims? And our role is really simple. Our role is to be the absolutely best Muslims we can be, so that we are the cause for them to come nearer to the deen than to be pushed away from it. And you can't do that if you are dehumanizing them because of the things that they do and say. You can't do that if you are disparaging them, right? I'm not saying that we accept. We don't, astaghfirullah. And if we're ever asked, what is your view about these issues? Well, our view is very clear. It's haram. It's not permissible for these reasons, X, Y, and Z. But then that's it. We push that aside. What we're then doing is we're engaging with them about trying to get them to change their fundamental belief on Tawheed. Because if you can convince them to at least start to consider their relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the universe, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of everything else. If he opens their heart to Islam, the rest of it is easy. Right? The rest of it is easy. If Allah is going to help them become a Muslim, then he'll help them deal with the emotions and all that stuff that comes with it. Why should we worry about something Allah is not going to concern himself with at this point? Right? Don't make it an issue when it's not. We obviously limit our own exposure to things which are haram, just like we do with anything else, whether it's alcohol or whatever the case may be, right? So we limit our exposure to it, but we deal with non-Muslims who are same-sex attracted as the same way we do with non-Muslims who are in anything else, right? You know, we know that there are people out there who make the whole living out of interest. Interest is 100 times worse than same-sex relationships. And yet we willingly accept befriending and engaging and socialising with somebody who ruins people's lives through interest, and yet we shun people because of this issue of same-sex. You treat them both exactly the same, right? You treat them both exactly the same. You treat them with mercy and compassion, right? You treat them with the aim that you want them to be attracted to the deen. That's your starting point, right? We don't discriminate. We don't treat them in any other way other than the best akhlaq and the best adab. What about with Muslims? And there is, you know, we can't bury our head in the sand and assume that there aren't. There are Muslims who have these feelings, and there are Muslims who have these feelings and fight them, and you know, do their best to not act upon them. And there are others, unfortunately, who have gone further and who very openly and publicly, you know, live that sort of a lifestyle. With the first group, if our approach to non-Muslims is mercy and compassion, then our own brothers and sisters deserve even more from us than that. Right? We're very quick to talk about the jihad of the nafs when we're trying to convince people that Islam is a religion of peace. This is jihad of the nafs. This is the true meaning of jihad of the nafs. When your nafs is telling you to do things which are such a bad thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you fight that and you succeed. Allahu Alam, but you know, that person will probably have a better place in Jannah than you or I, because of the test that Allah has given them. My test is nothing compares to that, right? We need to be supportive of people like that. Imagine how hard it would be for a Muslim in this community to reach out to someone and say, I'm having these issues, right? Imagine if somebody reached out to me and I was, you know, I condemned them, I was disparaging of them, I pushed them away. What's going to happen to them? Where are they going to go? They're going to go to someone who doesn't care about their akhirah at all. They're going to go to someone who says to them, you have a right as an individual to live this life. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Who's going to push them further down that track. And I'm going to be accountable for that, because that person came to me seeking help. And because I thought I was so much better that I pushed them away. What's the story of the Prophet ﷺ with the blind man? I mean, the examples are all there in the deen. I just want to quickly came and say, well, no, you can't do that. Right? We need to be really supportive of people in our own community who are struggling with these issues. It is a hard thing. We need to develop within our community professionals, people who know the deen, but also know psychology and these sorts of professions to be able to help them. Because they're not going to, you know, come out very easily and talk to people about these issues. But they absolutely deserve our support and our respect. But remember, these are people who are firm on their deen, who aren't out there openly practicing these acts. Those people who do, those people who are out there openly, you know, practicing stuff. There were supposedly Muslims who marched in Sydney last week at the Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras. You know, their final statement was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? We don't make takfir of anybody. But we treat them, my advice is we treat them as we do with the non-Muslims, right? We treat them with adab and akhlaq, and we deal with them, you know, as our professions require us to do. You know, if there's somebody in the workplace, you deal with them as you would with any other person. But then Allah tells us your faith is built by the people who you surround yourself with. So we limit our involvement. If the opportunity opens up that we can engage and talk with them, then we do. But otherwise, we limit ourselves. You know, their final stage with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It becomes really complex when we start talking about schools and those programs that we mentioned up front, right? The government is going to continue to drive this issue of normalization of these of sexual fluidity and sexual identity and all these other stuff. I guess the real crux of it, from my perspective, is education. Our education, right? We can't outsource educating our children on these issues any longer. right? When we were growing up, saying we, those who are my generation, 30 years ago, children of 10, 11, 12 weren't exposed to issues of sexuality. They really weren't, right? You know, it wasn't until you were well into your teens that you started to get exposed to these issues. But with the internet, with social media, with TV, right, movies, it's everywhere now. You know, you've got children at a much younger age being exposed to these issues. We are responsible for educating our children, right? I don't want you to answer the question, but I'd really love to know when the last time we gave children, 10, 11, 12, talk about sex education in the home. Or do we rely on their school to do that? Well, we've got to take accountability for that. We need to teach our children these issues, and it's not an easy thing to do, right? Islam is a religion of modesty, and so it's really hard to have some of these conversations. If you can't, find somebody that you trust within the community, whether it's the madrasa on the weekend or whether it's the sheikh or whatever, to have that conversation. We need to educate our children on what Islam says about these things, but we need to make them confident in the reasons why Islam sets these parameters, so that when they are at school and they start to hear and engage and be exposed to some of this stuff, they've got some firmness already to their deen, right? We don't allow their moral compass to be set by what gets taught in the school in the primary school years. We need to do that ourselves. We need to take control of that. And when schools start to introduce some of these programs, you can't sit back. You need to go and have a look at the programs that are being introduced, right? They're not compulsory. Schools at this stage voluntarily sign up to these programs, okay? Diversity is not a bad thing. So programs which teach children to be tolerant in and of themselves are not a bad thing. And in fact, for our community, really important. Living in a secular society, we need that society to be tolerant because we benefit from having a tolerant society. Where we have a problem is where tolerance moves into promotion of a particular lifestyle. So you need to understand what those programs are, what the content of the programs are. And you have a right to go to the school and say, on these modules, I don't want my child to be involved. I'm okay with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm completely pro-diversity and tolerance. But this module here, which says, children, it's normal for children to experiment sexually, absolutely not. We don't agree, and I don't want my child to be. You're entitled to do that. But you need to also have that conversation with your child. Because if you take your child out of that class, he's going to become isolated. You need to explain to the child why you're doing what you're doing and the reasons why. You need to arm them with the knowledge. Right? Children are maturing at a much younger age than 20 or 30 years ago. We need to start doing them that way. It's really ironic when one of the issues that, particularly on this issue of sexuality, that the non-Muslims always raise is the marriage of the Prophet ﷺ with Aisha. And yet what we're seeing is a trend of children becoming mature at a very much younger age, right? Which is what it was 14, 1500 years ago, right? And we're going back to where it was, right? We need to arm our children with the information. We need to take stock and really start to have conversations with our children that we wouldn't have had even 5, 10 years ago, right? We need to take the responsibility for that. And if you do that, then really what happens in a school? The harm becomes minimal, right? You stay in touch with your children, know what the schools are doing. Go on the Safe Schools website and have a look at the program. Understand what it is so that you can do what you need to do in the home to alleviate anything that comes out of those things. But you also got to teach your children about having rahmah, having mercy, dealing with people with mercy, because they will engage with younger people in a school or a university environment more and more who are in this space. And children can be really cruel at times without meaning to. Right? We need to educate our children on these issues so that they are demonstrating the akhlaq of a true Muslim at that early age. I guess I'll finish off with just some last hadith, just to really, demonstrate just how hard it is for us in this space. Islam began as something strange and will revert to being strange as it began. So give glad tidings to the strangers. Right? It's one of the signs of the last days. That Islam started off strange. Think of what it was like in Makkah with the Quraysh. It's going to end up just as strange. Inshallah, will be of the strangers. The Prophet also said, there will come a time when holding on to your iman will be like holding on to hot coals. It's going to get harder and harder for us just to do the basics of the deen. Right? And we can see that already starting around us. Not just in Western societies, in so-called Islamic societies. Look at the current debate in Egypt about banning the niqab. Right? It's going to be harder and harder for us to hold on to our deen. In Hadith Qudsi, the Prophet ﷺ said, of course, Hadith Qudsi is the Prophet conveying the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I am as my servant thinks I am. I am with him when he mentions me. If he mentions me to himself, I mention him to myself. And if he mentions me in an assembly such as this, I mention him in an assembly greater than it. If he draws near to me a hand's length, I draw near to him an arm's length. And if he comes to me walking, I go to him at speed. It may seem really hard, but we never despair. Right? We never despair. Allah is always there. We take one step, he'll run a mile to get closer to us. Right? We never despair of Allah's mercy and wisdom and the power of dua. At the end of the day, nothing is going to happen except with the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And nothing stronger than the dua of somebody of true iman, of true faith. So make the dua. We make the dua. Right? We make the dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect the ummah. Make it easy for our young kids to practice their deen in a society which is going to make it harder and harder. And they do it with the akhlaq, the adab of the Prophet ﷺ. I think we might stop there. It's getting a bit late in terms of Isha, and we might just have some Q&As as well. If there was any benefit in the talk tonight, that was from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and the mistakes, I'm sure there were, are entirely mine. So please, speaking of dua, make dua that Allah accepts my mistakes and my shortcomings, inshallah. So we have some questions and answers, maybe?
We take 2 or 3 questions. Brother Yasin?
Brother? The brother was just saying it's a really important issue, and yet, despite there's a lot of people here, there's still many people who aren't here. So how do we get the message across? I don't know if it's been recorded. So it's been recorded. So I'm recording it as well. I'm happy for this to go up on your internet site. We'll put it up probably on the Light Foundation's website as well. I'm repeating this talk after Easter at both Coburg and at Laverton, inshallah, as well. So if there are people who you think would be interested, then please pass on the message. And we just got to get into the habit of having these sort of discussions. I think that's really it. Anybody else?
Another question, maybe for the lady. From the lady.
I'm in your hands.
Yeah. I will pray Isha first, and then.
So we'll pray Isha first, and then anybody who wants to have any questions after that, then by all means.
We do it that way. So we have a pray Isha, and then.